ஓம் ஆனந்தமயி சைதன்யமயி சத்யமயி பரமே. ஓம் நமோ பகவதே ஸ்ரீ அரவிந்தாய. ஓம் ஸ்ரீமாத்ரே மிராரவிந்த சரணம் மம. I extend a very warm welcome to all sadhaks and devotees of Sri Aurobindo and Mother to this Professor K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar Memorial Annual Lecture. Let us begin with an auspicious act of lighting the Kuttuvilakku. I request the dignitaries here on the dais, along with Mr. Shivakumar and Mr. Surendran, to light the lamp to dispel the darkness and ignorance. To render the prayer song.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். இந்த பாடல் சூர்யா அப்படிங்கிற ராகத்தில் அமைஞ்ச பாடல். இதை எழுதினவங்க மனோன்மணி ரங்கசாமி அவர்கள். இதை இந்த ராகம் ரிலாக்ஸேஷனுக்காக உள்ள ஒரு ராகம். அன்னையின் பாதம் அழகிய பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம் அழகிய பாதம், அருள்மிகு பாதம் அற்புத பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம் அழகிய பாதம், அருள்மிகு பாதம் அற்புத பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம் அழகிய பாதம், அருள்மிகு பாதம் அற்புத பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம் அழகிய பாதம், ஸ்ரீ அன்னையின் பாதம். துயர்களை பாதம் துயர்களை பாதம் துணை வரும் பாதம், துயர்களை பாதம் துணை வரும் பாதம், பகை மிதித்தே பயம் போக்கிடும் பாதம், பகை மிதித்தே பயம் போக்கிடும் பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம் அழகிய பாதம், அருள்மிகு பாதம் அற்புத பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம் அழகிய பாதம், ஸ்ரீ அன்னையின் பாதம். எழில்மிகு பாதம் எல்லாம் தரும் நின் பாதம், எழில்மிகு பாதம் எல்லாம் தரும் நின் பாதம், தழல் போல் சூதை தகித்திடும் பாதம், எழில்மிகு பாதம் எல்லாம் தரும் நின் பாதம், தழல் போல் சூதை தகித்திடும் பாதம், அன்பு சேர்ப்பாதம் ஆனந்த பாதம், அன்பு சேர்ப்பாதம் ஆனந்த பாதம், துன்ப துன்பத்தை துடைத்திடும் தூய நற்பாதம், அன்பு சேர்ப்பாதம், ஆனந்த பாதம், துன்பத்தை துடைத்திடும் தூய நற்பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம், அழகிய பாதம், அருள்மிகு பாதம், அற்புத பாதம், அன்னையின் பாதம், அழகிய பாதம், அருள்மிகு பாதம், அற்புத பாதம், ஸ்ரீ அன்னையின் பாதம். அனைவருக்கும் நன்றி.
Thank you very much, madam, for the wonderful prayer song. As we all know, Bhagavan's yoga is integral yoga, which is also known as Purana yoga. Purana means complete, no exceptions. It is a yoga of transformation. It transforms the entire being, mind, body, life. Who can do this yoga? None other than Mother and Sri Aurobindo only. Then, as aspirants, what do we do? Bhagavan has given a key to that. Bhagavan has said, the key is constant remembrance of the mother. When we hear that, it appears to be a very simple task. But when we try to practice it, we struggle. Then how do we overcome that? There is another key given, a repetition of mother's name all the time. And secondly, reading the books, works of Bhagavan and Mother, and attending satsangs, programs like this. All these really help us in our path. That way, we are all lucky to have in our midst two eminent people who are going to address us, which will help us in our path of aspiration. And now I request our chairman, Sri Shivakumar, to deliver the welcome address.
Before that, I'd like to welcome our guest by handing over this.
Okay. So I request Mr. Shivakumar and Mr. Surendran to present the bouquet to Madam Deepti Tewari and Sri Aurobindo. Now welcome address by our chairman, Mr. Shivakumar.
Good evening to everyone. On behalf of Sri Aurobindo Society Chennai branch and on behalf of all the managing committee members, I welcome Srimati Deepti Tewari and Sri Auroville, who have consented to be present amongst us, and share their thoughts with us. I also welcome all the co-travelers in this path. Despite being a Monday, overcoming the traffic snarls, you have decided to come over here and raise the occasion. So on behalf of Sri Aurobindo Society, I welcome you all. This annual endowment lecture, as many of you know, we have been conducting, I think, for almost 2 decades. This endowment lecture has been instituted by Dr. K. Venkatasubramanian. He was a former Vice Chancellor of Puducherry University, in memory of Professor K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar. We may ask why we should have an endowment lecture and what significance Professor K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar has. In Sri Aurobindonian circle. Professor K.R. Srinivasa, I would like to talk about a few words regarding Professor K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar, because in whose memory we are holding this lecture now. Professor K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar was an eminent scholar in English. He was a Vice Chancellor of Andhra University, Vizag. He was the only person from Asia to be invited for a congregation in English literature by Cambridge University, an eminent scholar in English. But more than that, he is the official biographer of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. And he had the privilege of his biography first to be read by Sri Aurobindo himself when Sri Aurobindo was in his physical body. He had written a book on Sri Aurobindo. In its preliminary form, it was presented to Sri Aurobindo and he gone through it, and later on it came as a full-scale book. Secondly, later on he wrote the book on the mother. That was also written with the blessings of the mother. It was started with the blessings of the mother, but later on when the book came out, I think the mother was not in her physical body. And when he completed the book, The Mother, his eyesight was almost gone. Those days, we don't have this kind of Google and web search and all that. He was using manual typewriter, and he used to keep an array of books around him. And it seems when Sri M.P. Pandit visited him in his house, seeing him all the material spread around him, he remarked to the visitor who accompanied him that this is what a karma yogi should be. A real karma yoga is being carried out by Professor K.R. Srinivasa Iyengar. And he was instrumental later on, when he was Vice Chancellor of Andhra University. mother advised him to quit his post and go to Delhi. That time, Surendranath Jawahar was in Delhi, and the Delhi Ashram school was in the preparatory stage. So, mother asked him to go to Delhi and help Surendranath Jawahar in starting the school in Delhi. So he spent most of the time in Delhi, from where only this book came. The book on the elaborated book on Sri Aurobindo came. And this work has been carried on by his daughter, Dr. Premananda Kumar. Many of you must have known her. She has written so many books about Savitri, and she was the first person to do her doctorate in Savitri. So, to commemorate such a noble person, we have assembled here. And I should thank Madam Deepti Tewari, who had readily agreed to come over here. My friend, Mr. Sundaresan, will speak about an introductory details regarding the profile of Deepti Tewari. Before that, I would like to share a few thoughts about her background. Her father, Krishna Tewari, was he was a major general, I believe, right? Major general. And her family has got an army background. All her maternal side uncles are from army side. And when his father has participated in the World War II, and in Chinese aggression he was imprisoned. He was taken as a war prisoner. The time when he was captured by the Chinese, his wife, Dr. Lakshmi, she joined the army, and her 4 children she could bring up. By the time I think he came out of the capture, am I right? More than that, in 1971 war, with that he was in command of Eastern Command in Calcutta. That time, there was a huge task before him to capture, to make to carry forward this war, and he was a little worried how to carry out this mammoth task. That time, his colleague came to him, and looking at him, he was rather worried. So looking at him, he told, "Sir, why do you worry? If you don't mind, I have a suggestion to make to you. Why don't you write to the mother and seek her blessings?" So he wrote to the mother. That was in 1971. He wrote to the mother, and mother blessed him. We all know the result of this Bangladesh war. Nearly 90,000 Pakistani soldiers surrendered. And not only that, many of the army officers who were in the command, they received the mother's blessings. Later on, he became an all-round disciple of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. In 1976, he came after his retirement. He came with his family, his wife and 4 daughters, and they settled in Auroville since then. So Deepti Tewari, I think, came to the ashram, came and met the mother, it seems, when she was very young. And I think she's in she's in Auroville for almost 50 years, right? 50 years. So such is her background. And her three other sisters, I think one is in US, I believe. Two other sisters are in Auroville. So the entire family is devoted and surrendered to the mother, and they are in the services of the mother. This is about Deepti Tewari and Mr. Aurobindo. He's known to us for a very long time. His father is well known to us, well known to our society, and he's a low-key person. He's conducting workshops, and we are very fortunate to have him with us. So I welcome both the speakers, and they want us to be interactive. They don't want to give a monotonous speech. So they want the participants to interact with them. So you're most welcome to shoot questions, seek clarifications from them. So once again, I welcome all of you, and I thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivakumarji. What a happy moment. When I go through the profile of Madam Deepti Tewari, I only have a feeling that what a blessed child of the Divine Mother. Let me share with all of you the profile of Madam Deepti Tewari. Madam Deepti Tewari had the grace to receive Mother's darshan in her room along with her parents and siblings in February 1972. This was for all a life-changing moment. We can imagine that. 3 years later, while yet a teenager, she came to stay in the year 1975. After 10 years of involvement in various Auroville activities, including organizing national and international seminars, she discovered in 1985 the work she still continues, teaching in the free progress approach at Last School, LAST, Last School, the oldest Auroville school for teenagers. She has represented Auroville and spoken of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy in seminars and conferences, both in India and abroad. For many years, she edited the Matri Mandir journal. Presently, she edits the Bharat Nivas journal Bhavishyate. Her sessions on poetry, literature, cultural studies, and Sri Aurobindo's philosophy in Last School and at Bharat Nivas are attended by both teenagers and adults. We are very happy, Madam, to have you with us. And we request you to deliver your lecture on Sri Aurobindo's action and exploration. Welcome, Madam.
It's completely embarrassing to have this kind of an introduction, because I want to say that when you come to Sri Aurobindo, the one thing that remains true all your life is that you're very ordinary. Because a yoga that is aimed at transmutation of body, life, and mind, Unless you do everything, you've done nothing. So at best, each of us can say, as sincerely as possible, we are children of the divine, children of the mother. And that is kind of the best credit. When I look at this bouquet and I see the colors in it, you know that one of the things you discover in Sri Aurobindo and Mother is that every least thing has meaning and purpose. These colors are pink, which is the color of the psychic. So anything you see in matter, anything you see in the world can stimulate a deeper consciousness and awareness. And as Mother says, there's no limit to the growth of consciousness. And we are in our bodies here on earth, and the main purpose is growth of consciousness. In Savitri, Sri Aurobindo speaks about our souls being dragged as if by a hidden leash, carried from life to life, from birth to birth, from world to world. I want to say, after all the things you said about me when I was growing up, I was a troublesome child to my parents. I was very rebellious. I was full of questions. I was not satisfied with the world as it is. And my education and everything that I was getting was not satisfactory. I am so delighted to discover in Sri Aurobindo and Mother that those who are satisfied with the world as it is cannot turn to yoga. You turn to yoga because you're profoundly dissatisfied. Well, that's one thing I can say about myself. From a very young age, I did not like the world as it is. I did not even like, I happened to come from a family. My grandfather was, because my uncle had died in Kashmir in the 1947 invasion of Srinagar. He had got the Paramveer Chakra. So my grandfather had made an ashram, and in this ashram we had Swami Sivananda, Swami Ramdas. We had people from all over India coming. But the kind of spirituality that they were offering didn't work for me. It is all about lifting yourself above, behind, away, sitting upon life, sitting upon matter, and finally abandoning it. Adi Shankara says, Punarapi Janamam, Punarapi Maranam. And the whole purpose, it seems, of Indian existence is to break this cycle, to get out of it. Imagine my delight when I turned up at 16, thanks to my father. And the first thing I discovered of Sri Aurobindo was, man is a transitional being. Humanity is not the last rung of terrestrial evolution. Evolution continues and humanity will be surpassed. I could not believe that somebody had actually said that and presented the most cogent arguments about why that was so. It was for me wondrous, miraculous. Suddenly life had a purpose. Suddenly life had a direction. Because I found manifestation, existence, so beautiful. And for me, it was completely idiotic that whoever is the source of the universe creates this universe, the main purpose of which is to withdraw from it, to rise above it and to abandon it. This does not make sense. And actually, the only one on earth, because before Sri Aurobindo, nobody has said this so clearly. It has been said in the Veda and the Upanishad, but in a manner that is intuitive, mantric, speaking to those who know. So it doesn't speak to ordinary consciousnesses. But Sri Aurobindo and Mother have said everything, explained everything, organized it, told you about planes of consciousness, told you about states of growth, told you about what the purpose of mind, life, and body is. You can breathe. And one of the things that Sri Aurobindo and Mother very clearly say is, do not worship, become. So our task, I agree that remembering Mother all the time creates the equality and peace and harmony, which is the basis of yoga. Remembering and offering, that's the base condition of yoga. But beyond that, transformation means working on every layer of your being. And we have many layers. We are built of many parts. Sri Aurobindo says we have a multitudinous personality. It's a disorderly order. So the first thing that Sri Aurobindo's yoga demands is that you need to bring order into your being. And how do you do that? By self-observation, by self-analysis. Western thought ends with the idea, Descartes, we live in a Cartesian world. The age of science, the age of enlightenment, this I'm saying especially for Kavita, the age of science has brought this idea that I think and therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. But the Indian idea is, yes, you need to develop the mind. The Gayatri mantra, composed by by Rishi Vishwamitra from the Rig Veda, invokes Surya Savitri and asks it to come into the dhi yo nav prachodayat. And all Indians who are culturally practicing the spirit of India often know this mantra. We recite it. But what are we saying in this mantra? We are saying to the solar light, "O you, which is the greatest light in our universe, can you come into our intellect and illumine our intellect?" So ancient Indian thought has given a very high status to thought, to the thinking capacity, to the intellect. The Upanishad says, Manomaya Purusha Prana Sharira Neta. The mental being who is the leader, the Neta of the life in the body. It's not who you are. What are you? Indian culture says, you are a soul. And this is the unique gift we give to the world. This idea of soulhood. Personality is a creation of manifestation, a materiality. Our mind, life, and bodily, we have many personalities. We have a physical personality. We have a vital personality, not just one, many, many. And we have a mental personality. But that's not who we are. We are a person. And the whole yoga of Sri Aurobindo is addressed towards shifting the energy from the side of the nature, which is Prakriti. We are all manifestations of Prakriti. We have to shift the energy to Purusha. Now, often these words, Prakriti and Purusha, have associations with gender, but that's got nothing to do with gender, because one step above manifestation, there is no gender. Gender is animal creation. When we go to the soul doesn't have gender. The soul is a person, is a being. In fact, we are all Prakriti. And we have to shift that energy from this side to the Purusha side, the personhood, the soulhood that we are. One of the things that Sri Aurobindo and Mother spoke about from the very beginning, because this is a yoga of transformation, they say that any individual, and they demonstrated it, they were the two beings who demonstrated manifest perfection in all parts of their being. What do we do with such beings? We worship them. We put them on a pedestal and we pray to them. But from the beginning, Mother and Sri Aurobindo said that it's not enough. An individual can show the way. What we need is a collectivity of aspirants. and a collectivity of beings that are ready to consciously change their nature. Sri Aurobindo says, my yoga will show results when the external being changes. It's not enough to inhabit higher states of consciousness. We in India know that. We are the land of yoga. In fact, this is what we give to the world. We give three great ideas to the world. The idea of oneness, sarvam khalvidam brahmanasti, aham brahmasmi, tattvamasi. We are all that. Everything is that. And the great quest of the Upanishad was, Kasmin vignyate sarvamidam vignatam. What is that? If I know that, I know everything there is to know. And the teacher would say, you are that. And the student had to discover that, thatness, thathood, the higher hemisphere of Sachidananda. And that was the Upanishadic quest. But we've forgotten it in India. And if we want to be true to Sri Aurobindo, we have to remember this. We have to embody it. We have to reawaken the Upanishadic quest. We have to turn to yoga and do a conscious and enabling sadhana. Each of us. Because then we will create the collectivity, the satsanga of people growing together. That's the last invocation of the Veda. May we grow together. May we speak together. May we aspire on this road together. May we walk on this road together. So what Sri Aurobindo and Mother need is collectivities of beings that are growing together. And that creates a critical mass. I'm very passionate about this. So I want to say that let's try to do this. To be true to Sri Aurobindo is to live his yoga, is to embody it in our physical consciousness. In 1972, which happened to be the year also that my father brought us all. By the way, I came to stay 2 years before my parents, because the moment I had seen Mother, the moment I had read some of the things that Sri Aurobindo says, largely this idea that evolution continues, I had peace in my being. I knew what I wanted to do. Until then, I'd given my parents a very hard time because I knew all the things I didn't want to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I knew that I needed to go and sit at the feet of this being, these beings, two-souled, two-bodied, for the joy of time. I needed to sit at their feet and do the work that they have asked us to do. But in 1972, it was the first time really that in an organized manner, people from the ashram were encouraged by Sri Aurobindo to go out and speak the message of Sri Aurobindo. You know, when I don't know how it was for you all when you were growing up in school. I grew up in a public school, and certainly I never heard about Sri Aurobindo except in connection with the Alipur jail case. I hardly heard about Swami Vivekananda. I hardly heard about Sri Aurobindo. So I came to Sri Aurobindo absolutely not knowing who he was. In fact, the first thing I came across of Sri Aurobindo, when I returned home from boarding school, the war had started. Both my parents, because my mother was a doctor and also in the Eastern Command. My father was, of course, Commander Signals, and therefore I never saw my parents. But I found a little booklet in the house, which had been printed in June 1971, which called itself Sri Aurobindo on Bangladesh by a Lover of India. I had come home, the war was going on, Bangladesh didn't exist. So what was this booklet? For my 16-year-old consciousness, this was fascinating. I read that. It was a text that was written by Satprem, and Mother had printed thousands of copies, and they had been sent all over India. So my first contact with Sri Aurobindo was his comment on India's political security situation. First, it's completely dazzling that a spiritual being, a rishi, has so much to say about politics and security. And exactly, I mean, I come from an army background. from my uncle who died in 47, from my father who was a prisoner of war, from all my friends who lost their parents in the 62 and the 65 and the 71 war. I grew up with sacrifice and death and suffering. And I was very passionate about India's security. And the first time I came across somebody who speaks sensibly about India's security is Aurobindo. I recommend strongly that you read his social and political thought. He has 3 books. It's called The Human Cycle, The Ideal of Human Unity, and War and Self-Determination. We're living in a world full of wars, and the only spiritual leader who talks about why there is war, explains what is it in our consciousness that causes war to exist, is Aurobindo. So please discover him in all his many parts. He has something to say about everything. In fact, when someone asked Mother, how do I get wisdom? She said, read Aurobindo. He has answers to everything. So we Indians need to read Aurobindo. We Indians need to discover Aurobindo. Aurobindo is the future of India. Anyway, to go back to 1972, people were putting together texts to present Aurobindo to India and maybe even the world. And there was a tendency to present Aurobindo as the culmination of history and the culmination certainly of Indian history. And Mother said, no, no, no. Aurobindo doesn't belong to history. Aurobindo is not a teaching. He is not a revelation. He is a decisive action direct from the Supreme. I have spent my whole life trying to puzzle what is the difference between action, teaching, revelation. And I think we should all, because don't read what somebody else says. We need to discover this for ourselves. We need to discover the difference between a teaching, a revelation, and a decisive action. And Mother categorically says, she repeatedly says, that he represents an action. Aurobindo, after the Aleppo jail case, when he comes out, he gives this wonderful speech, which is called the Uttarpara speech, which is these days being quoted a lot. But actually, by the time Aurobindo gets to Pondicherry, he's speaking a different language. And in the Arya, his language is very different. So what is the purpose of the Arya? One of the things we discover about Aurobindo and in Aurobindo is if you read Aurobindo, you don't need to read anybody else because he represents the most extraordinary, the most perfect, the most complete, comprehensive synthesis of East and West. So if you wish to be a citizen of Earth, and after 1960s, when we finally began to get these wonderful pictures of this island that is our Earth home from space, you discover that this small blue island that floats in this dark immensity of space has no countries. It's just blue and land masses. So we have to imagine being Earth citizens. And Aurobindo can educate us very well on that. And in the Arya, he tells you what he's trying to do. He says, and these are essays that you can find in Essays, Human and Divine. It appears in the 4th year of the Arya. By the way, how does he land with the Arya? The mother, at that time Mira Alfasa, her then husband Paul Richard, they come to Pondicherry in 1914, and together, Aurobindo, with them, they decide to launch a spiritual journal. The journal is launched, it is subscribed, and the war is declared. And the mother, with Paul Richard, has to leave Pondicherry. So Sri Aurobindo is suddenly landed with a monthly journal that has been subscribed to, and he has to produce these 75 pages. So what does he do? He sits on his typewriter and he starts to write all his great writings. This is physically impossible for a thinking being. Everything that he has produced in from 1914 to about 1920, because later he doesn't want to write like this anymore. Later he focuses on Savitri, because Savitri embodies the totality of his vision. But what is he doing with the Arya? This is a drashta. This is not a thinker. This is a seer, like the Vedic rishis. And everything is coming from silence beyond the cosmos. All his words are words of revelation. He tells you all the things he's going to do. So I'm just jumping, I'm going to read you a little bit. He says, East and West have followed divergent lines. The West has laid most emphasis on truth of life, and for a time came to stake its whole existence upon truth of life alone, to deny the existence of spirit, or to relegate it to the domain of the unknown and unknowable. From that exaggeration, it is now beginning to return. And in some ways, you can say that Sri Aurobindo is an embodiment of that return, because he truly embodies the thought of the West. He's like a French, Greek, Latin being, because he knows all these as if they are his own culture. The East has laid more emphasis on truth of the spirit, and for a time, at least in India, to stake its whole existence upon that truth alone, to neglect the possibilities of life or to limit it to a narrow development or a fixed status. The East too is beginning to return from this exaggeration. So we who are Aurobindonians cannot exaggerate the life-denying tendency. If you are Aurobindonian, you have to be strongly life-affirming. And the question is, what does that mean? Because life is a notoriously difficult domain to transform, which is why most yoga systems, West or East, all religions have denied life. They sit upon life. They silence it. You have to be good. But Sri Aurobindo and Mother say we have to put all the extremes together. The moment you create good, you have a bad, and that's a duality. And Sri Aurobindo calls that duality a master knot. You cannot be in the duality because that's a knot of material nature. You have to transcend duality, which means in your consciousness, you have to hold the good and the bad and find the point where you can stand above and understand why things appear in this manner. It's not obvious because this understanding does not come intellectually. It comes as a thing of faith. It comes as a thing of quietude, samatha, sukham. It comes through such things. He tells us what he's trying to do in the Arya. He tells us why, therefore, we gave the first place to the life divine, because we needed to work out from a metaphysical point of view the truth of everything else. Which is why he wrote the life divine, which he considers not who he is. He says, I'm not a philosopher, though I've written philosophy. He says, I'm a poet. But he did write the life divine so that he could give the most powerful, cogent arguments of the justification of a life divine on earth. Nobody can say that it's not justified because he argues every single point of view that has ever been presented in any corner of the world. He turns to the Gita. He says we are turning to the Gita because we are treating powerful applications of truths of the spirit to the largest and most difficult part of the truth of life, to action, and a way by which action can lead us to birth in the spirit and can be harmonized with the spiritual life. We are so lucky in India to have this wonderful text called the Bhagavad Gita, because it deals with a moment of crisis in life, a ghoram kartavyam, and Sri Krishna manages to persuade Arjuna to go into battle and do the battle, to learn to be a nimitta matram, an instrument of the moment. And that's a particular state of consciousness. And that's the consciousness we have to develop in our life and action. And the Gita tells us how to do this. In fact, the synthesis of yoga is written on the lines of the Bhagavad Gita. He takes the Trimarga of the Bhagavad Gita, the yoga of action, karma yoga, the yoga of knowledge, Gyan Yoga, the yoga of love, Bhakti Yoga. And his first 3 books of the synthesis are presenting these yogas. And then he adds his own unique addition, which is the yoga of self-perfection. That is something that Sri Aurobindo brings to the world, to the future. We haven't even begun to explore what this yoga of self-perfection is, but that's the work that we are called upon to do. So he says we turn to the Gita. Truth of philosophy is of a merely theoretical value unless it can be lived. And we have therefore tried in the synthesis of yoga to arrive at a synthetical view of principles and methods of the various lines of spiritual discipline and the way in which they can lead to an integral divine life in human existence. But this is an individual self-development. And therefore, it was necessary to show too how our ideal can work out in the social life of mankind. Again, this is one spiritual teacher who's concerned with society. And which is why the 2 collectivities were launched. The first was the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, and the second was Auroville, because an experiment in social science research, in collective living, in an attempt to raise human consciousness collectively to a level where we can create a city of God on earth. We're very far from that. We haven't achieved any of that yet. But the aim of the experiment is that, nothing short of that. So in the psychology of social development, we have indicated how these truths affect the evolution of human society. In the ideal of human unity, we have taken the present trends of mankind towards a closer unification and tried to appreciate its tendencies and show what is wanting in them in order that real human unity may be achieved. Sri Aurobindo is very, very, very concerned about human unity, because his yoga can only achieve effective manifestation if human unity is effected. As we can see, we live in a world that is profoundly divided. After he wrote the Arya, and the mother came back, by the time we get to 1926, where there is this very, very powerful experience, which happens on the 24th of November, 1926, which is called Sri Aurobindo's Siddhi Day. Sri Aurobindo withdraws into his room and the mother is put in front. All the disciples that have gathered around Sri Aurobindo have to learn now to relate to Sri Aurobindo via the mother, because his yoga can only be done through the mother and by the mother. And he withdraws. And after that, there is no contact with Sri Aurobindo except through letters. And he writes thousands of letters. In the latest edition of the collected works of Sri Aurobindo, there are about 7 volumes of letters. He has written letters on just about every subject on earth. So it's worth exploring those letters. I'm constantly turning to the letters to try to understand problems of life, problems of existence, problems of yoga, problems of relationships, everything. Sri Aurobindo speaks about everything in the letters. So this is an extraordinary treasure. But for those of us who find Sri Aurobindo a little bit complex, you have all the conversations of the mother. And mother makes everything so extraordinarily simple. So we can read Mother, and she makes Sri Aurobindo's yoga almost so easy. This very impossible yoga, you listen to Mother and you read the Mother, and you can do it. You and I, ordinary people, we can do it. And that's the key. Now, in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, before he begins to write the Arya, he is practicing some very, very strong disciplines upon himself. He doesn't ask us so clearly to do it, but he has a very powerful, strong program, which today we have in 2 volumes called The Record on Yoga. In this journal, a PDF version can be sent to any of you who want. I have put just the first Chatushtaya. He calls them the Sapta Chatushtaya. And the first step of his yoga is Samatha or Shanti Chatushtaya. And he says, Samatha, Shanti, Sukham, Hasyam, Iti Shanti Chatushtayam. So if you wish to create any stability in the yoga, you have to create absolute equality in the being. Absolute peace in the being, no agitation. A lot of yogas allow you to have, this vairagya, I have been abandoned by Sri Krishna, why is he? Not in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. In Sri Aurobindo's yoga, you have to hold very strongly your consciousness. Samatha and Shanti are the base upon which everything is built. Why is this so? It's because the body is the base and the pedestal upon which everything else has to be built. I came across this lovely sentence of his about the body. I will just read you this wonderful sentence. He says the body needs dharana shakti. This is in the yoga of self-perfection. The notations of the body and the physical consciousness has a very large determining power on the music made by the human harp of the divine. So be very careful of what your body is doing, what your body is saying, because your body is the harp of the divine. And the music, is the music you're producing discordant, or is it in accordance not only with all the different parts of your being, but in accordance with whatever the world is throwing at you? The first step is the body. The Veda says shariram khalu dharma sadhanam. So this idea that it's only in a body that yoga can be done, and that this body is not something to be discarded. It has to be perfected. It has to be made a harp that makes beautiful music. And if you look at the kind of work that Mother did in detail in matter, like I just said about the flowers, the language of flowers. One of the things she said to the disciples, in the 30s, she's doing this with the disciples. She says, we cannot go back to the Veda and the Upanishads. Evolution always moves forward. So what to do about creating the mantras? And you can make flower prayers. So here is purity. If you take a bunch of flowers and you can make a prayer from them. So the purity, you have Harshringar, you have Malipu. So the purity of my aspiration, Harshringar is aspiration. Roses are divine love. And you can make yourself a prayer. And every morning when you wake up, you can just look at the flowers that you see around you and make a prayer to the divine. For a consciousness that's awake, prayers are everywhere. And the body's prayer is through this conscious self-expression. To be conscious is to have antenna everywhere, to use every moment as a moment of growth, as a moment of self-finding. So, this yoga can achieve results when we change our external nature. Just because we are born with a particular personality, that is not who we are. That is formed by our environment, by our education, by our language, by the religion which we happen by chance to be born into. None of this is who we are. Who are we? We're a psychic being. So we have to shift away from all these outer forms to the psychic being. And do you know that until Sri Aurobindo, no Indian thought, spiritual thought, has spoken about the psychic being. We hear about the Angushta Atman, we hear about the Atman, we hear about the Jivatman. But what is the psychic being? Where did this come from? Because no other yoga is aimed at transformation. Sri Aurobindo says, I am concerned with the earth as it is. It's a terrestrial realization that I seek, not a flight to distant summits. Any other yoga is to step behind, to step within, to step above, and you can find the self in any yoga. Sri Aurobindo's yoga is not to find the self. Sri Aurobindo's yoga is to transform the body, the life, the mind. And therefore, for the first time in yogic literature, we hear about this special being, which is a spark soul, which is an evolutionary soul. So you have, Sri Aurobindo accepts the Vedantic idea of a sevenfold world. The higher hemisphere, the Vidya, Paradhra, is Satchitananda. There is a dividing sphere, which Sri Aurobindo calls the supermind, which is Vijnana. And then there is the lower hemisphere of mind, life, and body. Up to now on earth, it has always been the lower hemisphere, the highest of which is the overmind. The gods come from the overmind. Sri Aurobindo wants us to surpass the gods. Sri Aurobindo doesn't want us to make him into a god. Sri Aurobindo wants us, he says, look, this is what I've done, you should do the same. He's saying become, do. And he wants you to transform your outer nature. And to do that, the shortcut is the psychic being. Because this evolutionary soul, the fact that we are sitting in this room and talking about it, it means that spark soul has evolved to the point of being a being. That's who you are. That's the one that should speak to you. That can help you to find the truth of yourself. Sri Aurobindo talks about a triple transformation, the first of which is the psychic transformation, to find out who one truly is. Each of us is equal only on that plane, on the plane of our psychic consciousness. Outwardly, we may have more of this and less of that. Doesn't matter. That's not who we are. We are the psychic being. And that's where the truth of oneness exists. So the first step is the psychic transformation. Once that is achieved, we can start to universalize our consciousness, and that is the next step, the spiritual transformation. And it is only when we have achieved the spiritual transformation that we can start to do Sri Aurobindo's yoga, which is the supramental yoga. So right now we are on the banks of this yoga, which is the most fabulous program for the future. Sri Aurobindo is the future marching towards this realization. And we who know Sri Aurobindo have to help the whole of India discover him, because he is the one that can solve the problems of India. And if India's problems are solved, the world's problems are solved. So we need to discover Sri Aurobindo in his wholeness, not in his limitedness. And we need to discover the fact that he talks about a collective realization. So you in Chennai, who are devotees of Sri Aurobindo, you have a huge responsibility. You have to introduce Chennai to Sri Aurobindo, which means you have to do it very actively. I don't know how, but I recommend you find solutions, because that is what we have to do. In Savitri, Sri Aurobindo says, each being there is a member of the self, a portion of the million-thoughted all, a claimant to the timeless unity. the many's sweetness, the joy of difference, edged with the intimacy of the one. When you go to Savitri, every line can lift you up. When I left Pondicherry in 1972 as a 16-year-old, I carried Savitri with me. And all my answers to profound questions about who am I, why am I here, what am I here to do, I found the answers in Savitri. And the thing is, poetry is not prescriptive. Poetry lets you find the truth just as it speaks to you. So this is the most profound gift that Sri Aurobindo has given to us. And I want to say, you don't have to know English too well. You just have to dive into that atmosphere and flow in the current of these words, and they lift you into another dimension. And they have the solution to the future. And therefore, I'm going to read some lines from Savitri and then I'll stop. And if you have questions. One of the 4 aids that Sri Aurobindo speaks about is time. He says Shastra, Utsaha, Guru, and Kala. Yoga is a process. You cannot do what might take you 40, 50 years. The Isha Upanishad says, may we live 100 summers, doing verily works in the world. We need to live long to be able to do an enabling sadhana. This cannot be done in a day, so don't be impatient. Time is a factor. So he says, yet it is joy to live and to create, and joy to love and labor though all fails, and joy to seek, though all we find deceives, and all on which we lean betrays our trust. Yet something in the depths was worth the pain. A passionate memory haunts with ecstasy's fire. May we be possessed by this memory, this passionate memory, that gives us the ecstasy of this journey into the future. We are profoundly lucky. And 2 things, 2 qualities help us to move on. This is the truth I've found in myself. The Greeks have a word called enthusiasm. Theos is God. Entheos is to be filled with the God energy. So if you can always be enthusiastic, you're ready to do 1,000 times, like the Bhakta of Sri Krishna, again and again and again, just for the sheer love of the divine. Doesn't matter if you don't reach. Life is a seeking and a finding. It's not necessarily an arriving. And we will not arrive at the next step until we do it all together. Because this is a collective yoga, and a collective yoga has another law to an individual. You can certainly find yourself in the traditional yogas, but a collective yoga, and Sri Aurobindo's yoga is a collective yoga, a yoga of transformation, requires us all to do it together. And until then, we are just more or less ordinary beings. Even the saint and the yogin is connected at the lowest level to that inconscience, which is the plane where Sri Aurobindo and Mother's yoga is acting. So we have a long work. So we should be ready for this marathon, and we should just experience the joy of it. The second quality is gratitude. Because with gratitude, it's okay. You can do it again and again and again, just for the sheer love. At the end of Savitri, it's the epilogue, and Savitri has vanquished death, and she and Satyavan are coming back, and Dyumatsena, who's been restored to sight, and the rest of the kingdom has come to call him back to the kingdom, and they've come into the forest to look for Satyavan and Savitri because they've taken a longer time than usual, and they're a bit worried. Where are Satyavan and Savitri? And so they meet Savitri and Satyavan coming back, and somebody in the crowd looks at Savitri and says, "What is this? You're different." And she says, "No. The only change in me is that to love and feel oneness is to live. That to love and feel oneness is to live. And that's the only change. So if you want to know if you are in the yoga, find out if you feel love and if you feel oneness. In a world where everybody is pushing you into a place where it's very hard to feel oneness. We can't even get along with the people closest to us. God knows how we can get along with the rest of the world. And yet the truth of yoga is to feel oneness. So we just keep measuring ourselves against that standard. To feel love and oneness is to live. The most powerful force on earth and the least active has been love. Because love is an action. So if we want to, I started with this question, Sri Aurobindo's action. If we want to understand what Sri Aurobindo's action is, it's this immense, extraordinary capacity to give, to love. How many of you remember what is said by Mother at the Samadhi? Can I read it to you? On the 9th of December, when he was being interred in the Samadhi, she had this inscribed at the Samadhi. And for me, it is the truth of who Sri Aurobindo is. Every word is significant. To thee, who has been the material envelope of our Master, to thee, our infinite gratitude. Before thee, who has done so much for us. Somebody's saying it. I'm so glad somebody's saying it. Before thee, who has done so much for us, who has worked, struggled, suffered, hoped, endured so much. Before thee, who hast willed all, attempted all, prepared, achieved all for us. Before thee, we bow down and implore that we may never forget, even for a moment, all we owe to thee. So in this year, the 150th since his birth, we express our infinite gratitude that we have the grace to be part of his world. Yes.
Anything you would like to interact?
Normally, I don't just speak. I like it to be interactive. I'm so sorry. I just spoke. Anyone with a question? Yes.
Madam, you spoke about 3 transformation. One is psychic, the other one is spiritual, and the third one is
Supramental. We are not even there yet. It's really another dimension. Our bodies have to be changed. But at least we are not there consciously. We are not there in our self-awareness. Mother has interesting experiences in the agenda because perhaps we live on many planes. Yet there are parts of us that are growing towards. But in manifestation in the body, we have to focus on the psychic and the spiritual, which we can do in our present state of consciousness. No. Meaning that the Veda and the Upanishad represent the highest truth. It's a secret. And Sri Aurobindo has written 2 books about it. So our present consciousness, which is a mental consciousness, finds it very hard to understand those intuitions. Sri Aurobindo turns to the Veda and he discovers in the Veda confirmations about experiences that he is having, which he found nowhere else. So you have to be a drashta like Sri Aurobindo to read the Veda and experience what the Veda is saying. We read his interpretation, But an interpretation speaks to our mental consciousness. It is not something we embody. Truth of the spirit has to be embodied. It hasn't to be thought. So, how do we create that intuitive consciousness? We of today are mental beings. So, in the answer to that mental being, we can create mental prayers. We can harness the power of the mind to make ourselves progress. In fact, the mind becomes the best instrument to accelerate our evolution. So Mother is not dismissing the Veda and the Upanishad. On the contrary, she is saying it requires their secret words, and you can understand them if you inhabit that state of consciousness. So, of course, all of us, if we inhabit that intuitive state of consciousness, the Veda can speak to us. But most of us are mental beings in that sense. Yes.
Regarding the psychic pain, both Mother and Bhavan says, won't it be with him? Could you please explore more on the psychic pain? How to recollect what has happened in previous life? Can we?
She asks this question, is it necessary? It actually doesn't help our growth and progress. It might even retard. So, existence has been organized in a manner that is most useful for self-development. It is true that you may have a sense of déjà vu sometimes, but it tends to be romanticizing very often. Because when people tell stories, is it your story? Or is it because the world is full of beings? There are disembodied vital beings, there are disembodied mental beings. Unless you have psychicized your vital and your mental, when you leave your body returns to its elemental structures. Your life spirit returns to universal life, because life doesn't die. And the mind returns to universal mind. But in our mind, we may have created formations. So there are all these mental, vital formations that are floating around. This is what Sri Aurobindo and Mother call the intermediate plane. Now, Sri Aurobindo and Mother are very, very clear. Please do not explore this intermediate plane, because if there is the least impurity in your being, you can get trapped by this. And a lot of these questions about our past are perhaps not very useful for our future. What you need for your future, the universe will give you. But someone like the Mother, she worked upon it. There is a moment before she comes to India, and she's in France, and she has some sort of a back injury, and she has to lie flat on her body. She cannot move. So what does she do with that time? She begins to extend herself out of her body. And finally, she goes down the steps, and then she goes out into the garden, and there is a building in the garden, and she's looking in. It's in a physical consciousness, but it's a subtle physical consciousness. So she says that you and I, have 12 senses. We don't have 5. It's just that we don't pay attention and we don't develop them. You hear stories of Helen Keller. She was blind and deaf, but you could not walk into a room without her knowing what your mood was. Why are you sad? She would ask. You took her to a cemetery. There is a sad atmosphere here. How did she know that? We are capable of clairaudience, clairvoyance, telepathy. In fact, Swami Vivekananda, in one of his essays, he writes about the powers of the mind. And in India, lots of people develop these powers. But these are not spiritual powers. And Sri Aurobindo and Mother are concerned with the spirit. They don't need you to develop these intermediate powers, because what they do is these intermediate powers develop the ego. And the age of ego is over. So Sri Aurobindo's yoga makes us very ordinary. We have to be laborers in the quarries of the gods. And we should be just happy with this labor, because what we are creating is a collective future which transforms the earth consciousness. So if that interests you, Mother says it's an adventure into the unknown. And I invite you to this adventure, and we are not going to do what others have done before, because nobody knows that it can be done. So all the traditional yogas give you siddhis. Sri Aurobindo says that's not the aim of the yoga. If a siddhi comes to you, fine. Don't use it egoistically. Be careful of letting the ego use it. Siddhi is one of the statuses. In fact, in the Sapta Chatushtaya, the last is Siddhi Chatushtaya. But he starts with Shuddhi. You cannot get Siddhi safely unless you have purified your consciousness completely. And purifying your consciousness means removing the ego. Mother has this vision in the agenda that she says, when you learn how to stand in the light of the Supreme Consciousness without casting a shadow, that's the supramental. So the shadow is the ego. This yoga is directly addressed towards the ego. We have to become nothing. There's a line in Savitri, no one and null, a vanished vestige like a violet trace. And Savitri has this experience, and then she becomes everything. Because beyond this nothingness, there is everything. Then she is the flower, the plant, she's everything. She becomes everything. It's when we become nothing that we can become everything. So if you can dream of reaching that, then what does it matter what you did in your past life? You obviously did something good, because we wouldn't be talking about yoga in this life. So I always tell myself, I had a good life. I turned to Sri Aurobindo. I have the grace of finding Sri Aurobindo. And what greater grace on earth can there be? It's 7:30. Enough? We stop?
Thank you very much, madam, for the wonderful talk. To describe it in one word, the 1 hour that has passed without our awareness, and you made us to meditate, you made us to feel that we were in meditation. Such was the impact of the talk. Thank you very much, madam. And I have an appeal to our chairman. We would like to hear more and more Madam Deepti Tewari in the days to come. So that is my appeal. I am sure everybody here would concur with me on that. And I would request our chairman, Shri Shivakumarji, to present a memento to Madam Deepti.
Sri Aurobindo Society, on behalf of all of you, as a token of love and affection, we present this small memento to Madam Tewari. And she has to leave for Auroville. That's why she is excusing herself, and then